Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Start a Board Game Company from Off the Page Games. I am Jay Cormier. Now, I didn't have an episode last week for those, couple dozen people that subscribe to this channel. But it's because last week I was at Fan Expo in Toronto. I was invited as a guest. I got to speak on a bunch of panels about a whole bunch of cool things, which was really awesome. But I also got to spend time demoing this game that I'm talking about through this series, Mind Management, to the public. And this is the first time I've been able to demo it to the public. We did one demo at Gen Con, which is great. And now, I was able to demo it all day Friday and all morning Saturday to a bunch of different people and had a great turnout. A bunch of people showed up, people that didn't know anything about it and just was walking by, and I reeled them in. And then other people that knew about it from tweets, either from ourselves, Sen and I, or from Matt Kint. People were like, yeah, I saw Matt Kint's tweet about this, so I want to check this out because I love the comic or whatever. And it was fantastic, and it was great. We learned a few things, and we might even tweak a couple things, really small things based on some of the demos we did. So it's really cool. It's like in the 95% mark as far as how everything's coming together. So it was great. That was fun. That was super exciting, and I had a really cool experience where a very well-named board game designer actually pitched me a game. And I thought that was super cool because it's my first time as a publisher where a game designer, and it happened to be a well-known one. It's very exciting. Pitched me a game. Now, if you know, my company is all about publishing games based off of comic books, and preferably creator-owned comic books, just so I don't have to get into, talk to Dark Horse or Marvel or whoever. I'm not that big yet, so let's just start with some creator-owned comic books so I can deal one-on-one with them. And the game was designed after a creator-owned comic book, and the owner of that comic book, the creator of that comic book, had played this game already and approves of it. So they're on board. So I'm like, wow. And I didn't get to play it, but I only had to pitch, and I loved it. So I'm very excited about that. I can't wait to play it as soon as possible. So this is a really new phase for me as a publisher, is looking at other game designers. Originally, I'm like, oh, I'll just publish my own games, and this will be a way for me to just do stuff, publish my own games. But now I've got other big name designers that are interested in partnering, so I'm excited. But what we're here to talk about today is prototyping, because for that event and for the fact that I have this ambassador program going on, where this weekend right now, for those that are watching it right now, is LA Strategicon and Grand Con are happening, and Sen is doing a demo at Grand Con of Mind Management, and then I had a wonderful person named Dave who volunteered to be a brand ambassador and go and demo Mind Management at LA's Strategicon. So I'm super excited about that, but it meant I had to go and make a full prototype for that person and mail it to them, along with a bunch of these awesome postcards. So if you go to Strategicon or to Grand Con, you'll be able to get those postcards, as we all know that they're awesome, with Matt's new awesome art on it. So let's go through the process of how I make a prototype, and you can maybe give me thoughts of how maybe I could do it better or different, or maybe you'll get some tips on here about how you can do it better. This is just the way I kind of do it, and the way I've been doing it for years and years and years. Let's check it out. So I use CorelDRAW. This is kind of the program I use. It's a vector-based program. I know it's not super popular, but it's kind of what I've used forever and ever, and I'm very comfortable with it. Obviously, whatever program works for you. I lay it out page by page. I want to make it as cheap as possible to print it. Don't use too many pieces of paper, So you can see the board there. Every section of the board has its own page. You'll see later how I put it together. Then we send it to the printer, and I use a Epson Super Tank. And I know a lot of people say laser's the way to go, but I've actually been pretty happy with this printer, and it's a little bit more expensive than normal inkjet printers, but the ink is ridiculously cheap. And I think there's some studies done that this can and is cheaper than laser, so we'll see. Doesn't take up as much space as a laser. It's pretty tiny. I like it. So I have one of these slide cutters. So when I do cards, I do a 3x3 on a page, and it's 2.5 by 3.5, but I make it a little bit thinner, like 2.4 inches wide, and that makes them slide in and out of sleeves a lot better. I don't use bleed or anything like that for my cards, because this is just a prototype, and I'll cut the edges first, then I cut them in kind of strips of 3, and then once I have 3 rows of 3, I'm able to pile them together and cut all 3 in a row, and this makes it a lot faster. And now you can see here's the board, I trim the edges of the board with my cutter. And I kind of prefer this kind of cutter rather than the arm cutter. The arm cutters can have more creep. By the time you get to the edge of the cut, the page might shift a little bit. I think there's more expensive ones that don't do that, I guess, but I'm pretty happy with this one. It wasn't very expensive, and I've been using it forever. Now I think I need to actually replace the blade. It's getting a little dull, but regardless, it's still working, and I like it. Now I have a secret board in my game that has a dry erase, and so here's a cheap way to do it. I just get an acetate paper, and I just tape it over the printed board. Tape it so it doesn't kind of move around, and it doesn't need to be firm like on a board because it just lays flat on the table. So this is perfect for me. Now this is how I do the board. Here's all 6 pieces, and I lay that all out so that I can see the full board in one kind of picture image. Make sure it's all in the right order, and that's how it looks. And I'm going to do a 6-fold, I think it's called. What I do is I'm going to tape 2 pieces together on the vertical edge, and I check to make sure it lines up, and then I tape it. Then I flip it back over, and I line up the next piece, and this one, assume it lines up, there we go. Then I flip it over, and now I'm going to be taping on the horizontal edge, and you'll see why once I can fold this up. And I'll do that for each of the other sides, taping only the horizontal edges. And when we're done, boom, we've got the nice full board, and that's how we fold it up. Boom, 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 boom. Isn't that sweet? Folds up nice and compact. Now, in this game I have a screen because it's a one versus many game. And so for my screen, I have an advertisement, if you will. I thought that'd be a good idea considering I'm going to be giving it to other ambassadors and want for them to play it. So I then got a template from the Game Crafter for the sides so that it kind of sits right. And so how I do it is I print on full label paper for this kind of, I guess, advertisement. This is totally unnecessary, but I thought, hey, we got some good vertical real estate, might as well use it. And I print on a full label page, and then I stick it to a mat board. Mat board is what you get from like a framing store. It's the inside that sometimes they throw away. You might be able to get this for free. I actually go to a kind of a urban source supply store that just has a bunch of junk, and they sell these mat boards for like $1 each, so it's great. So I print on label paper, and I stick it, kind of rub it down, and then I'll just cut around using ruler, X-Acto knife, and a mat underneath. And that's just for that one side. Again, this part's unnecessary, but I think adds some nice flavor to the table and some table presence. Then I have to cut out the template of the sides, and so this is the thing I got from Game Crafter. So I just printed these on paper and I cut them out, and I'll use that to trace onto my mat board and cut out the actual sides. And then once it's cut out, you can see one side of it. Boom, it lines up perfectly. And then I just have to affix some tape there. I probably use some sort of duct tape or fabric tape. Now it's time to make some tokens. Again, I use mat board for tokens. I print on label paper. I have a ton of these tokens on this printout. It's not necessary for this game to have this many tokens, but because I think I'm going to be printing a lot of prototypes to mail to ambassadors, I just printed a ton so that it was kind of easier to do in one fell swoop and doesn't waste any of the label paper because that's kind of expensive. So same kind of idea. I stick this down. I use my X-Acto knife and ruler until it can fit into my cutter, and then I use the cutter for everything else because I find using my cutter is a lot easier and faster. And the last thing I had to do is make these mental note tokens, and I bought this adhesive whiteboard paper that sticks to anything. So I stuck it to mat board, and then I used these arc punches to hammer a circle shape. And I really shouldn't have made them a circle shape. I could have just used my cutter and made them squares. Really silly. I thought this would be easy, but I don't have the right tools for it. I got the arc punch and the hammer and stuff like that, but I don't have the right mat, so I'm using a brick, which is ridiculous and probably dulling these arc punches. So very silly. From now on, they're going to be square tokens because there's no need for them to be circles. And so then I have to sleeve everything. So sometimes I use clear sleeves when I have to do something that's double-sided, like these character cards that have the training mission character on one side and then the full game character on the other side. And then for everything else, I like to use a different colored sleeve, so it's very easy for demo people and even the game players to be able to identify what card's what just from the back. So in this case, I'm going to use orange for my recruitment cards, and that's just easy for everyone to know for the rest of the game. Oh, orange cards are recruitment cards. And so here we go. Here's the full prototype. So I have the kind of these player aids that are kind of a last minute thing that I added just on boards. Here's the screen that's made up. I just have to tape it. I don't have any tape yet, so I have to go to the store and get some tape. Here's the board, which is kind of all folded up and nice and neat. Very shippable. There's the secret dry erase board. I got all the tokens and all the cards with different sleeves. These are all the different player tokens. Things that are on my board. A couple of markers. Everything that you need for a prototype for mind management. So that's how I make a prototype, and I then ship that off to my ambassador, or if it's for me, obviously I use it, start playing with it. Let me know your thoughts on how you make a prototype. Maybe there's some tips that you have that you can share with me. Hopefully you learned a few things about how I make prototypes and how I can kind of make them as fast as possible, because it's not necessarily the fun part of game design. Some people obviously enjoy it, but when you're doing it so often, when you in the game design process, you design and then you have to make a prototype, and then you test it and you realize 90% of it has to change. Then you have to redo the art, then you have to reprint it, then you have to remake everything. It can be a very tedious process. So I try to find ways to make it as fast as possible. One is those card sleeves is a big tip, because you just take them out of a sleeve and put new ones in. It's easy to update. Things like the screen or the tokens, those are a lot harder to make, and if you just had to print a new 2 or 3 new tokens, well, you're going to waste a whole label page just to do that. So I try to find other reasons and things I need to print on one label page to try to reduce waste and kind of maximize, because it's expensive too to each page of label paper, for example. Anyways, that's how I do it. That's all we have time for this week on how to start a board game company. Join us next week when we'll talk about something different. I'm not even sure what we're going to talk about yet. See what I'm doing, I guess. Whatever I'm doing this week, we'll talk about that. All right, take care.